Since 1970s, the medical industry has been using 2D images and scanning techniques for patient education, for surgical planning, for customized medical devices. Welcome to Scouted by GreyB. Today we are in talks with Roger Johnston, who is the CEO of Axial3D, and they are trying to solve this problem where better technologies are available, like 3D printing techniques, advanced materials, LLMs, and AIs, which can be used to convert all the technology that we are using today in medical industry into 3D live models, which will make lives easier for patients, for surgeons, and in general for the world. It's an interesting conversation that we are going to have. Let's take a deep dive.
Right. We wanted to first talk about Axial 3D and your role at it, where, as far as I saw from the website, you were not involved in the founding of the company, but you are managing the uh, executive business of this company. Would that be right?
Yes, good morning. Axial3D was founded in 2016 by Dan Crawford, who recognized that 3D was going to have a vital role in the world going forward, but needed to scale 3D imaging. In 2019, he wanted to start commercializing the invention that he had built, and he asked me to join as CEO, which I was delighted to do, and 5 years later, still delighted.
Excellent, excellent. So I think one of the first question that I wanted to lead with is, in your experience, what is the difference between a homegrown CEO and somebody who is coming and managing the day-to-day operation? I understand that you have been doing this since the beginning of the idea of commercialization of the inventions by Dan. So what in general are the differences according to you?
Yes, so the reason Dan asked me to become CEO, the way I put it is because I've got scars. I've seen over the 36 years of my career, I've seen most scenarios. I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly. And I guess having that experience of knowing when one of those things happens, here's the options as to what to do. I think it's difficult being a first time round CEO. I found it difficult at my time because you don't have that experience to draw on. Now, of course, we can have advisors around us who can fill in a lot of those gaps. But for me, it was very mature of Dan to recognize that his strengths were inventing and building an amazing product. And what he wanted someone to do was actually be able to take away the governance issues and the growth issues associated with Axial3D that really were needed for us to take advantage of this opportunity fully.
Understood, understood. That makes sense. And I think a lot of startup founders are too close to their products. And oftentimes they fail to realize that entrepreneurship and taking it through the series of fundings, making the product scale to a certain height. I mean, it's a difficult job and it's a new job for anybody. I mean, however good you know about the product. So having that clear picture of strength and weaknesses, I mean, that's a positive and a very, very good sign from somebody who is starting with a technology as compared to any other type of startup. That makes sense.
So I think Dan has huge strengths, first of all, in recognizing what he wasn't strong at. And I think that's something we should all focus on. That's how I build teams. I build teams around me with people who do what I don't do well, who are expert at what they do. So that's what he did. And what that allowed was Dan to bring his amazing strengths, which are actually in terms of the invention and the product. And the way he engages and communicates in the most trusted way with our customers is really remarkable for me to see. And certainly none of those are things I could do. So I think we have the perfect partnership.
Understood. And that makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing that. So Roger, while I was going through the website, I wanted to understand the application area of the products that you guys are building. I mean, some of the things that I could understand was helping take the patients through what is going to happen during surgery, so on and so forth. So it's helping surgeons actually create 3D images that can help patients understand what's going to go through the surgery, so on and so forth. But in general, if I were to ask you, Roger, what are the three most commercialized application areas of the products of Axial3D? I mean, what would those be?
Okay, so let me first of all start and say, for us, we believe that 3D imaging as an output, as a base, whether it be for surgical planning or for patient education, or whether it's for more complex things like building medical devices that are patient specific, we believe that 3D fundamentally will replace 2D, which is where the world has been since the 1970s MRI and CT imaging, where physicians have to consider the world in a series of 2D images. So fundamentally, 3D, highly precise 3D, we believe over the next 5 and 7 years will replace 2D pretty much in all cases. There will be no cases where 2D is better than 3D. I often use the analogy of color TV replacing black and white TV. It happened when color TV was no longer a premium product, when it was scalable, when it was as accessible as black and white TVs and at the same price point, at which stage no one had any need for black and white TVs. And that will happen the same with, in terms of the output of 2D, will get displaced by 3D. So what does that mean? Application one, absolutely in terms of surgical planning and diagnosis. Too often we hear stories, especially for complex surgeries, where surgeons are doing too much of the surgical planning during surgery because they can't tell enough from the imaging before they go into the surgery. So they have 2 or 3 ideas what might be wrong, and they open the patient up and go, oh, that's what it is. And of course they're expert. But that on average takes maybe an hour extra for the surgery. The second is absolutely patient education. I am a lay person when it comes to medical imaging, and I've had too many orthopedic traumas from my sporting past when surgeons say to me, Roger, as you can clearly see when we're looking at the medical image, and I hold my hands up and I can't see. So how can I be fully informed and consented when I don't understand what's going to be done to me? And that concern amplifies when it's a really serious condition. So certainly application number 2. I think almost the most exciting is the world of medical devices, where we're going to be able to make those patient-specific going forwards. So whether it be for cardiovascular procedures or for orthopedics procedures, the opportunity to have the treatment customized and specific to you, as opposed to having to use generic tooling such as standard size cutting guides or drilling guides for orthopedic surgeries, or even the joints themselves all being standard sizes, where in the future, the future coming today promises that to be patient specific. So the drilling guide that's going to fix your knee in place for a replacement will be patient specific. Ultimately, the knee joint will be patient specific. It will be a perfect copy of your existing knee. And this will transform patient outcomes and set a whole new level of surgical standards for the world to enjoy.
And that makes sense. So you talked about surgical planning, patient education, and then medical devices, which are going to be highly customized to patients. Now, if I talk about the third area specifically, that requires not just innovation in 3D printing, but it also requires innovation on the material side of things. Because, when you make guides, or in fact, even make things that are implantable during orthopedic surgeries, there is also kind of profiling that these materials get damaged when they are inside the body of people. And those damage profiles are also very specific to the people who have been implanted with these devices. So if we talk about Axial3D, is it innovation in 3D printing making it easier, or is it the material side of things which may be future looking, but in general that does require a lot of research? So what is it, Roger?
Well, so the answer is yes, yes, and yes, I think. But look, it's a great question. I think, first of all, I would say the fact that the devices will be patient specific, even if it's just using the current material technology, will be a huge step forward. So even in terms of infection rates and failure to achieve full function on whatever the device usage is, that will be dramatically improved by having patient specific devices. Of course, however, material science and 3D printing science are crucial to a lot of these progresses, and certainly as we want to mainstream these technologies. For me, material science, whether it be polymer, whether it be metal, I think that is where huge potential arises, certainly in terms of the treatments that we're talking about here today. Of course, there are areas like bioprinting going on top of that as well. Yes. I think when you look at materials that are going to be used, so my 3 cases, surgical planning, patient education, those scenarios, of course, we want the materials to be safe. We also want them to perform in a way that allows the surgeons to see what's wrong with the patient more accurately and for the patient to understand. But of course, equally, those models aren't going to be used. They're not going to touch your body. They're not
Yeah.
going to go inside you. So when we're talking about materials that will be either used on top of the anatomy or actually replacing and going inside your body, the performance and safety, of course, of those materials is crucial. And whether that be, we will see huge developments in terms of polymer materials invention over the next 1, 3, 5 years. We already have some fantastic materials, certainly from a safety point of view, but for a number of the devices we're talking about. I think, of course, that safety is both, does it chemically react, but also in terms of does the device stay in its shape and perform and not break and not degrade. And I think that's where, to date, a lot of the materials used for certainly orthopedic surgeries are metal, but that comes at a cost, whether financial cost, it's more expensive potentially, but then also just in terms of having to then drive the science to use lighter and lighter materials that have the equal strength capabilities. But it's truly exciting and in many ways has overtaken the printers themselves as the bottleneck or where the great science opportunity is.
Yeah, yeah. So, Roger, I mean, you highlighted a very important point that the first two application area that you talked about are outside the body. Of course, I mean, the utility is for the surgeon and the patients, but still you want it to be effective, whether it is in patient education or whether it is in surgery planning. Now, then there is also the aspect that you were talking about, the safety and I would say the engineering part or the science part that also will need to be customized. But then the third point are the regulations. I mean, so as soon as you go to the medical devices side and specifically the implantable side, there comes a lot of authorities, regulatory authorities like the FDA, like the European Medical Authority. So I mean, all of these, as soon as you innovate, you have a product ready, you know that you have done your internal testing, I mean, everything is good. But then there is a delta or a delay that gets added because of the regulatory bodies making sure that it's really safe for human use. How, in your experience, will you deal? Because I mean, nobody is going to wait for 10 years to get it approved. I mean, people would want to actually see certain positive indications that, hey, I mean, this is good from an FDA perspective. We have a US market which is open now. Even though we have an innovative device, nobody would want to wait for 10 years to actually get that going. I'm talking from an investor's perspective. So in your opinion, in your experience, how do you deal with these kind of deltas, which are kind of uncontrollable from a CEO's perspective, but are very, very important from a funding perspective if you want to scale it, if you want to expand and diversify?
Yeah, so again, the world of regulations by the medical regulators is critical. And I think unfortunately, it's somewhat of a given that this just takes time. And actually, in most cases, the time it takes is for very good reasons. A lot of the time that is taken up will be with clinical trials. And actually, all of the devices we were talking about earlier, whether for patient education, surgical planning, and then treatment, all are actually regulated in some way or the other by the FDA. So even though the surgical planning models won't be used inside of your body, they actually need to be super accurate. Yeah. So the FDA care passionately, not only that it's accurate, but it's accurate every time. And therefore they pay huge attention and a lot of the same regulation occurs. However, of course, not only in terms of the accuracy of the treatment, but when you come to medical devices that they're being used with the body, then there's a whole period that extends that within the clinical trials. The clinical trials also exist for surgical planning, so we understand what outcomes might happen and why people should use them. But those trials certainly take a longer time when we're talking about devices that are being used in or going to be actually left in the body. I think from an investment point of view, the key is expert investors are needed for this category. Yeah. This is not just for a venture investor who maybe invests in finance or retail or manufacturing. This is a specialist investment category. I think the reason at a high level why people are prepared to take the extra couple of years to commercialization that normally VCs would have an appetite for is because once you get the product to market, then it is very sticky at that stage. Yeah. So it's the next product that's going to compete with you has to come through the same cycle And therefore, once you've got your product to market and it's proven and it works, actually the market opportunity to commercialize that product often is much longer, maybe 7 and 10 and even longer years than you might see in other industries. But that needs specialist investing.
Got it. That makes sense. So it's not just the technology, but also the VCs who come for those technologies who want to fund them. They are also differentiated when they are actually investing in medical devices as compared to maybe something dealing with artificial intelligence and the software aspect, or something dealing with something.
Yeah, very much so. And actually, that's an interesting area now that we see that technology innovation from an IT sense now is colliding with medical devices. And that's an area, if we use artificial intelligence, of which our system is one of the leading and enabling imaging technologies on the planet. This is an area that the regulators are really having to get their head around. So they understand a lot more about the physical properties of physical devices. When you start not only coming to software devices, but you're coming to AI-enabled software devices, that is a tough area to get your head around in terms of regulation, especially when you come to things like safety. And always, we have this burden of proof of safety. But we're fortunate to be working with the FDA currently to actually help build out and inform and contribute to what best practice should look like for going forward. So it's an exciting area, but also, again, it certainly doesn't speed up the cycle to deployment.
That does make sense. And I think, anybody who has been involved on the medical side of things, medical devices side of things, and medical devices and AI-enabled software, I think, they have to be patient and they have to go through all the milestones before the product gets commercialized. But there was one question that was coming up in my mind, Roger, and that was, so there are stories, there are events where you are actually, say, for example, talking to a surgeon, and then suddenly you see that, hey, the surgeon is happy because he was able to do things that he would not have been, or she would not have been able to do with only 2D imaging or 2D planning. Have there been such moments that you have witnessed? And second, a follow-on question is, what was that time or an event that you, Roger, said, hey, I believe in this product. This is good. This is huge. When you saw it in action, or when you saw something. So what were those events? What were those moments? If you can recall them.
So my very first interaction, if I'm very open with Dan, was I had a trauma with my lower back, and Dan created a 3D model for me. And when the surgeon had shown me the medical images, I had no idea what they were talking about. He printed the model and I could understand it. And if I could understand it, then that provided a reassurance that this technology had real legs. I would say daily, because we get surgeon feedback, which is, I wouldn't have been able to see that, or I can't see that in the 2D imaging. Where that leads to is that 3D, whether it be imaging or modeling, is and will increasingly set new fundamental standards of care. We now have certain patient conditions, some organ oncology cases, pediatric congenital heart conditions, where the surgical teams, physician teams we work with around the world say it is not ethical for us not to have 3D. It's not ethical, and they tell their ethics boards in the hospitals and are mainstreaming the use for these procedures with 3D at the heart of it. So for pediatric hearts, imagine a baby's heart is tiny, and therefore not only is the CT or whatever imaging they're using not precise enough, but we're not precise enough for a tiny organ. It's not an adult organ. So the precision needed is quite extreme, and that's where 3D comes into its own. So we are now literally unlocking the ability for surgeons to take on cases and have high probability of success with pediatric cardiac cases that to date, the ethical solution, unfortunately, was not to operate on the child and just let them pass away, because the potential for treating them, diagnosing them, and then treating them was so improbable. And that has reversed with the use of 3D. And we're starting to hear that over and over again with many other patient conditions, both adult and pediatric. So I think I have a great hope. But at my age, because I cry a lot, I hear these stories and it is heartbreaking, but it's also wonderful and it gives us a mission. That means we all get up out of bed after a hard day at 7 o'clock the next morning, get to work, and we've got a reason for doing this. So it's a very special opportunity I have running this company.
Yeah, and it's a very powerful motivation. And what you talked about, it's non-ethical to operate in pediatric surgeries without a 3D image. I don't think anyone in the world would disagree with that, because and you rightly said, it's still not fully developed. It's not an adult heart. You need to understand it very, very precisely. I believe, that's where Axial 3D comes into picture. It's the precision part that you have highlighted, that the more precisely and the more accurately you know what you are going to do, the chances of success are going to be higher. So how does this precision come? Is it an algorithm? Is it the knowledge that you guys have internally of human anatomy, or is it something else? What is it that makes you so precise in terms of 3D? I understand 3D rendering is better than 2D. Of course, there is no questions about it. But what's so precise that surgeons like it so much, or they're happy about it?
Yes, so at the heart of this precision is AI and machine learning. So conceptually, I think when you can train algorithms, and in our case with millions of labeled MRI and CT scans, that we can now identify not just what anatomy is there, but every pixel on an X, Y, and Z axis. We have a 99.9x% pixel recognition accuracy. So we understand, and of course, visualizing this is so much stronger, but we actually understand what every pixel is throughout the anatomy. Therefore, it's not just the surface that I'm looking at when I'm trying to treat a patient, let's say with an orthopedic trauma. I understand the damage that's been done inside of the anatomy or whichever part of the skeletal system. And therefore, things that there was no possibility other people we could have seen in the past, we can now understand. But the invention doesn't start there, because now that I understand not only that that is a tumor, but I can start recognizing and automatically measuring the characteristics of the tumor. How dense is it? What are its dimensions at incredible precision? I can now start doing remarkable things like creating a 3D template that's incredibly precise and passing that to a robot that's going to be removing the tumor. Now, of course, the promise of a robot that's removing tumor is incredible, but unless it's got an incredibly accurate 3D template and understanding of the tumor, it still may have to kill off excess healthy anatomy to be really sure that all of the diseased anatomy is taken out. But with the precision that our 3D offers, we can add the precision in the planning of the robotic surgery as well as the execution using the robot. And that, again, is just another example of the why not just being able to visualize in 3D, but actually understanding the composition of every pixel, every cell inside of that 3D anatomy will transform surgical care going forward.
Wow. I think, you gave a new definition of precision to me, because, when I was imagining precision, my mind was limited. But when you talked about the actual texture, the look, feel, density of that tumor, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think that's very, very important in terms of accuracy and precision. Because you're right. Surgical planning to an extent, simply visualizing is one part. Visualizing it accurately is another part. But then actually really getting the touch and feel and that kind of dimensions associated to the 3D model, I think that's great. And that's something that I believe is very, very helpful. Now I can understand why surgeons will appreciate this, why people going through the procedure will appreciate this.
Just as another example, if you think about a clot that you might have or a patient might have in their body, and the surgeon or the team have a choice to chemically try and treat it or to intervene and surgically remove it or interventionally remove it, that decision is made based on characteristics, at least to a layperson like me, like the density of the clot, as in the density and size. How susceptible will it be to completely breaking down with chemical treatment? Today, that information isn't available. Where if I can automatically, every time we take whatever CTA scan and convert that into a 3D, not only are we identifying precisely where the clot is, but we can identify as default, as metadata, as a pop-up, what is the size of the clot, where is it, and what's the density of the clot. The surgeon no longer is using 30 years of gut feel or experience to try and decide what treatment path. They now have mathematical accuracy to inform that decision, and that it will fundamentally change that type of patient outcome when you look at it across a corpus of patients.
Absolutely. I mean, that sounds amazing. And I think decision making is what is the most crucial aspects in medical procedure, whether it is on the surgeon side, whether it is on the patient side, whether it is on the insurance side. I mean, all of them, they're waiting for information to make decisions. And the more accurate the information is, the higher chances of success, like I mentioned earlier. Now, that also brings me to two more questions, Roger. One is, when you are so much customized, when you are so accurate and precise, how does that translate into scalability? Because I mean, every time you have new information, every time you have new patient, every time you have a some or the other variation, which makes standardization difficult. So you always have to be customized. I mean, every time. But does that not affect the scalability part? Because I mean, if I ask you most, and I'm assuming here that your end clientele are hospitals, research institutes, so on and so forth. I mean, they might not be the end patient, although they might be involved in that process. It may also be insurance provider, your end customer, because they would want to understand all of those kind of things. So how does that affect the scalability part? Because, you know, as a startup, you always keep that in mind. So
this comes to the nub of how this moves from being a niche technology that's maybe used only for the most complex cases, or even for only those few people who can afford it. So it becomes either a premium product or one that's for the most complex cases. How do we move this to where it's used for, it's just within the standard of care for everyone, and it's delivered at the same cost of care or lower than the current option this will replace? That is the mission of Axial3D, is to drive that scalability. So when we look at scalability, of course, the first that people look at is how automated can we make this process? And we are the most automated system in the planet today for turning 2D artifacts into 3D. And we're increasingly FDA and related certified for this. So that's fantastic. And that means that we're creating these, our competitors, our predecessors created these amazing 3D artifacts, but it was using an expert CAD/CAM software where one person who's expert, highly trained, with expensive software can create one model at a time. What we've got to be able to do is do thousands, tens of thousands of models in parallel that aren't constrained by having expert people to do that. And that is what our invention is, both technically, from absolutely FDA and ISO 13485 type processes, so as certified as we possibly can. And even things like we have an amazing partner with AWS, where we keep we run our software in the country wherever the patient and surgeon is, and therefore their patient data never leaves the country. So even things like medical data privacy standards, that's all part of scalability. If this can only be done in Ireland or in America or India, or whatever it is, then that's not scalable beyond one country. And that's what making this cloud-based software. So every day we wake up and go, how can we make this more scalable? How can we make this more scalable? And the great news is, working with our amazing orthopedic and cardiovascular medical device companies, we can now manufacture at scale, or they can now manufacture at scale, or have the promise of doing that, whether it be these orthopedic or cardiovascular devices, at the same price point as they do today, the standard size ones. And that's going to transform medicine. That is when patient specific becomes the default, in the way that color TV became the default, when there's just no case, whether cost or performance, as to why you rely on the old standard of standard size medical devices.
So customized is the new standard, is where we are going with Axial3D.
Absolutely. And coming soon. This is not 20 years in the future. This is about at scale, doing what we already know how to do today, and at a price point that allows us to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if you honestly ask me, the more deeply I think about Axial 3D, I see a lot of moving part that needs to align with each other and then go in the right direction to actually make it a powerhouse. I mean, usefulness wise, I think you guys are solving something which has been a big problem throughout. And that has been a long standing problem. It's not a new problem. I mean, people have been using 2D imaging from a very long time and have been relying less on the 2D imaging and more on their guts, like you were talking about. It's the experience that we're coming up. So, with the coming of AI, I think there are a lot of benefits that we are seeing. One of those are in the medical devices side and also on the medical treatment side that we are looking at. But then there are moving parts like regulation, geographies, then there are moving parts like cost, I mean, which is a big factor. And then the governments are also involved. And then the other part is the funding part. So all of these combined together actually takes you in the direction which is towards fulfilling your mission. I think, and that's why people need somebody who is 36 years experienced in handling these kind of moving parts to make them align and go towards a good direction. But then I was also thinking when you were talking about the preciseness and the 99.99x kind of precision. So if I take a step back, what I'm seeing is, let's forget about medical devices in general or human anatomy in general. It's essentially things that you cannot see through naked eyes is what you're trying to reimagine very, very precisely so that it becomes very, very familiar. Now, if I take only this definition, you have oil and gas experience. Oil and gas is also something like that. You can't see deep down. The sensors stop working there at 2000 meters, and you don't get a quality information that you actually need to go for a good operation, which means it's again the 30-40 years experience of people which comes into play that, hey, I mean, this is a weak signal, but I have seen it 10 times, so I know, I mean, this is what is happening inside, right? Do you in general see the application of the knowledge and the operations of making it precise being applied to other application areas apart from medical devices? Of course, I understand that this may not be the focus of Axial 3D right now. I mean, it's something you have a mission. But are there thoughts that come to you as a CEO that, hey, I mean, I see this and there are so many potential, and especially because you have been having experiences in so many domains, you could, I mean, if I see something that I have seen in the past and I see an application here, I immediately correlate that, hey, I mean, there is an adjacency, there is potential. But what your thoughts are in general about this statement, Roger?
Yeah, so it's a fantastic area to think about. Our world exists only at Axial 3D for medical, and for a very good reason, because our invention starts with an MRI or a CT scan or some other DICOM file, and therefore where we're unique in the world only exists in that scenario, which becomes medical. However, I think some of the things we've talked about, such as printing materials, I think becomes a really remarkable area, and one that if I ever had time not to be thinking about Axial 3D, would love to spend more time. I think some of the use cases, we in Northern have an amazing company that is printing buildings and 3D printing outdoor furniture. And these are remarkable technologies. And not only does it give an opportunity from a cost saving point of view and a speed of construction, whatever these devices are, but in terms of recycling materials, they're not using first time round materials. These are all recycled materials they're using, which is just mind blowing in terms of that type of opportunity. So I have huge belief in our category of 3D and 3D printing, at least as one of the outputs. Of course, not just because you can do it in 3D, doesn't mean 3D printing doesn't mean it should be done. So, for example, I've seen plenty of cases of people 3D printing candy, but I don't think that's ever going to be the way to create candy at scale. The other direction that I would take is not just the physical outputs, but actually what's possible from 3D imaging. So obviously, whilst it's still medical, you still have the opportunity for the way that the electronic files are used, maybe in the construction of a physical product like a knee joint, but then also in terms of been experienced within virtual reality and other form factors that are similar, and actually dropping that into education, which of course may be medical education, but also a lot of the technologies will jump into other categories, other market verticals is exciting. If I apologetically stick a little bit with medical, one of the amazing things that we can do in education, but in medical education, if you imagine that patient case that you, as a surgeon, you will only see once in your 35-year career. The challenge with that is the first time you see it is somewhere during your 35-year career. It certainly wasn't in your education phase of your career. We can now recreate those cases, those once-in-a-lifetime cases, and we can print those out, let's say a little baby's heart, in lifelike materials, a once-in-a-lifetime case, and there might be 20 different once-in-a-lifetime cases, and you can practice those as many times as you like during your education phase. So imagine you have deep experience of performing once-in-a-lifetime cases by the time you get to that once-in-a-lifetime case. That's a remarkable thought process.
Very powerful.
It actually is makes your head spin around. So
Yeah,
we're excited about that. So if you excuse that I'm calling education a different sector, Vikas, that would be my best answer.
I think, that is an excellent answer, because I have worked with companies who do exactly this. They are getting their knowledge integrated into medical universities, courses with few credits. Maybe that is one way to start with that. As an industry, as somebody who is working on the other side of things, you contribute your knowledge, your education towards some credits in degrees that are out there. But in general, the wider or the broader thought process is that things, because of your experience, because of your age, because of any XYZ factors, you cannot experience for the next 20 years. You'll be able to do that as quickly as possible. I think that's very, very powerful. Those are the life-changing moments in surgeons.
Absolutely. We have to remember that this generation of our next generation of surgeons are all digital natives.
Yes.
That they're not people of my age who have always done it this way for 40 years. Yeah. They are not just open to new technology, they're born and brought up in new technology. Yeah. So the way that they experience a virtual reality headset, well, they were using it last night for their Xbox games. Yeah. So it's not a new technology, it's just applying it to their day job. So I think also that the time has come for the world of medical care to become fully digital.
Yeah. And I think, this might be a statement that you're making from your experience. But if I go outside the scope of this conversation, everything is so good. All the technologies are progressing. They are moving towards digitization. It's the medical tech which has the most advancements in terms of intricacies, in terms of treatments, in terms of use of new materials, so on and so forth. But it's not visible to the common world, right? It's limited to the people who are involved in that industry. While on the other hand, if you see anything being developed on the software side of things, telecom side of things, it's in the hand of the customer. So it's very, very visible. And I think what you were talking about is something, the digitization of the medical tech, the medical industry. I think that would be very, very powerful, because nothing like that exists. It's in bits and parts and in imagination. So if it comes to reality, that would be great.
I think we have all the healthcare innovation that is needed to make healthcare fully digital, whatever that means. But it's some of the challenges we talked before about the regulatory and the needing to make sure everything is safe and scalability. Yeah. Those are the challenges that in the broad, the medical industry has not yet succeeded in the way other industries, banking, consumer FMCG, oil and gas have now achieved. It's for some good reasons that we've just talked about, but it's also just probably the industry hasn't thought that way. But now we've generations of new talent coming into the sector who just won't put up with the old ways. So I'm very hopeful that over the next 7 and 10 years, we will move to a level of digitization in healthcare that is similar and up to what we deserve as populations.
And after talking to you, Roger, I am also very hopeful that will come into realization. But there is one last question that I did want to ask you, and that was related to IP in general. So I talk to CEOs, I talk to people who are heading R&D departments of Fortune 100 companies. But what I don't get is a clear picture of what IP means for them. I mean, do you as a CEO think about IP, about patents, about trademarks, about secrets? What is it that IP brings to your mind when you think about IP in general or patents in general? Because I don't understand the utility. Of course, I have been working in the innovation side from the past 11 years, and I do things that creates value from studying the IP, so on and so forth. But in general, from a CEO's perspective, what is the value of IP for you, especially in the
So
medtech?
I think when I look across a number of companies that I've led, I think sometimes intellectual property, the methodology or your know-how where you try and create competitive advantage in terms of how you do things, how your team operates, how they organize. And others, and Axial 3D is very much one of those. It's about actually within the invention, in our case, a software invention. How can we both protect the effort and investment that has been made in that, but also for our customers and our partners, how do I give them and enable them to have a freedom to operate leveraging my technology? We are very fortunate as a company that back in 2016, Dan had even for a very young guy at that stage, had the sense and wherewithal to actually start applying for fundamental patents. And patents that are at the core of the scaling of medical 3D imaging that I'm talking about and how we do this at scale. And we are very fortunate that we have, I think, approaching 20 approved patents in the US Patent Office. Wow. That for us in our business are actually fundamental to our future, but also I hope that they're fundamental to our customers in giving them a freedom to operate and a somewhat protectable freedom to operate from those that they compete against. So it is in this world, and even though the world of AI and medical devices is moving incredibly quickly, I think it is an area that offers huge potential to companies like my own, but it also forces you to think about where am I unique and where should I be partnering with someone else who has intellectual property and know-how and maybe a great technology where I don't need to reinvent what they've already reinvented. I should partner with them and I'll build my invention on top of their capability.
And who does that job? I mean, because, I mean, as a CEO, you understand all of these things, right? But then I have not seen a lot of people with core IP experiences working at startups. I mean, it's somebody or it's something that comes as an additional role to the CEO or to the CTO. I'm not sure. So although it's the way you explained it, it's very, very crucial. It also helps you in getting partnership. It also helps you give indemnification to your customers, avoids infringement, so on and so forth.
This is definitely a minefield. And I think lots of people will go through a lifetime and be incredibly successful business leaders without really having to come across intellectual property and patents and worry too much about it. It depends very much, I think, on the industry and the specific circumstances of each company. I think where it is important, unless you come from a IP background, it's not something you're necessarily going to have done at college or be educated in. And it's also something as you build your career where you're probably not involved until you're at a leadership level. So it's an interesting area, and I think many leaders don't, probably just because of history, have that experience. But even I've been fortunate to probably spend more time in this area than many others. But I rely 100% on my patent lawyers. And patent lawyers are paid a lot of money for a very good reason. But it's absolutely critical that when you're spending a lot of money on patents, that things like getting a freedom to operate search and being really clear that you're inventing a patent that has utility and value, but also is defendable and doesn't infringe on anyone else's patents. I think it's a minefield.
It is.
And that's where having the really, really good patent lawyers is important. And really good patent lawyers in your business or functional area, in our case, in medical devices, and that's not a common thing. So but we're very fortunate to have amazing patent lawyers.
Excellent, excellent. And that does give me some perspectives on how CEOs and people in your position think about it. So what's the end game here for you as a CEO? Because one of the trends that I have seen is companies like Axial3D or any other companies which are working in an area which is already dominated by large giants like Johnson and Johnson or maybe Medtronic, Zimmer, anybody like them. Ultimately, looking at the past 10, 15 years, what I see as a major trend is consolidation. As soon as you have an FDA approved product, that's when you come into the notice of large giants, because now you have something which has got exclusivity associated to it. FDA has approved it, you have patent IP on it, and in the meantime, you have developed your customers, you have earned their trust, which is like everything ready in a platter for giants to actually come in, sweep in, give you profitable exits, so on and so forth. Is that something that you have thought about, Roger, or it's not in the horizon right now?
So I'll give it hopefully I'll answer the question in a slightly different way. Our role in life is to make sure that millions of patients around the world, irrespective of their location or whether they're first world or third world, their ability to pay, that their procedures, whatever part of the care pathway, will use highly precise 3D. And I want to be at the core of that global transformation. I can't do that by myself because I'm a small Northern Irish company. Therefore, I have to partner with the types of medical device and medical imaging companies that you're talking about. But the great thing is my job is to make their medical device portfolio patient specific, or their medical imaging capabilities 3D by default or rich 3D by default, whatever it is that they're focusing on. And the great news is they already are the companies that are used to treat millions of patients every year. So my answer is I have to partner with as many of those that reach as many patients as fast as I can. Now, I'm not naive to the fact that the M&A world of medical devices doesn't mean that companies who are attractive in terms of their differentiation become very attractive. But that could be through a strategic investment. It could be also through an acquisition, as you say. That part I'm not worried about at the moment. Our focus is how do I create as many amazing partnerships with these truly remarkable global companies so my technology becomes a part of the treatment of as many hundreds of thousands and millions of patients as fast as we can. And if I can achieve that, I've made a difference.
I think that's a great answer, Roger, and that's a great perspective to have. I think I can keep on talking to you for the whole day because I'm learning so much. And I can see the shift in my stance as soon as you answered this question internally that, hey, you're right. At the end of the day, it is the mission that you have, and there are ways to achieve it. It could be through somebody else's help. It could be through your own growth, whatever it is. At the end of the mission, the vision that you guys started with is the most important part. And I think, that's a solid anchor to have when you are leading a startup with so many variables, external variables coming into the picture. But great talking to you, Roger. Thank you again very much for your time. And I think I learned a lot, and so will our audience. And it's things that you talked about which are not written on the website that truly makes Axial3D special. Please convey my regards to Dan. I think he did a very, very good job in show versus tell.
It's very kind of you to say. Yeah. Look, it's been my real pleasure, Vikas.
Thank you.